3D Galaxy Force 2 is just a mouthful. So I'm going to be referring to the game as Galaxy Force throughout the review. But let's not forget the 3D or the 2, as both are indicators of what makes this such a great value for your 3DS. So I figured we'd start with some history. When Galaxy Force first released to the arcades in 1988, it was something of a technological breakthrough, as well as a marvel. There was no experience quite like it on the market at the time, and the reason for that is because when you played the game, you would actually move with it. There was some full body control, and I imagine that must have been quite a spectacle to behold, especially firsthand. Now the 2 comes in that Galaxy Force 2 is the definitive edition of the arcade experience. They actually made 2 models, and so the second game basically perfected on the original one and allowed more body control as well as enhancing the number of levels and fixing some glitches. So that's the form that we see ported to a lot of the home consoles throughout history, and sadly most of them just suck. So a lot of them don't hold a candle to the original arcade experience, with the possible exception of the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation 2 via Sega Ages collection. But that one's only released in Japan, so good luck with that. Fortunately, come 2013, Sega and M2 mark a momentous occasion in porting Galaxy Force 2 over to the 3DS. And this is more ambitious than you might think for several reasons. One of which is that this game actually includes 2 versions. So just like the PlayStation 2 version, which was a compilation of the Galaxy Force 2 titles, this one has a smoother remake, which is called the Special Edition, as well as the original arcade game. So both play really well, with the arcade version just packing in a bit more of a punch in terms of challenge. But the way that they really break through for the console is in their implementation of 3D. Now both work excellent in terms of utilizing the 3D, with the special one just being a bit smoother, but the arcade version being more intense. So both provide a very surreal experience, and one that matches the sense of innovation that the original arcade game established. And it's funny because at the time, in 2013, many games were just using 3D as a gimmick, but the way that 3D Galaxy Force implemented the feature really put a lot of these sister titles to shame. And for that, I really do commend Sega and M2 for going the extra mile, for preserving and fostering the sense of arcade culture and integrity, as well as faithfulness. Now, in spite of simulating this out-of-body experience via 3D and feeling like you're really behind the wheel, you might find Galaxy Force a bit unremarkable. And it's understandable, because this game is one of the early pioneers for the 3D rail shooter genre. But you're still going to notice areas where you wish it was just a little different. So for instance, your ship itself is really flimsy. I like to think of it as a pea pod that wishes it was the Intrepid. And I mean this in that, like, you have a fuel system and a shield, and once your shield degenerates and you get hit, parts of your ship start to come undone, and then you'll just have to go through the rest of the game with a dilapidated wing, or like fires going on in the corner of your ship. And that can be a little bit of a nuisance. And in general, the game just doesn't feel very epic, or at least, in concentrated areas. For instance, there's no real end bosses, and it's just a short game. So those are things you might just notice during your playthrough. However, one aspect I do hope you notice is that the game succeeds in establishing this real sense of adventure. And the way this is done is by providing a variety of landscapes, as well as creatures and robots or spaceships that you'll come into contact with. So it always feels fresh and like you're exploring a new horizon, but in a foreign wasteland or planet. Another aspect I really hope you noticed by now is that bass, because it's slapping. So as you can tell, the music is really quite professionally done, and it really enhances what would otherwise be just a generic rail shooter. And it's really a takeaway, not just for the time, but even today, to hear something so well composed. Now, another aspect I did mention is that it is short, which is unfortunate in a way, but all the same, I find that it's really easy to come back to, and I must have played it at least a few dozen times by now, since buying the game back in 2014. And it's been a great value since then. I mean, I purchased the game on the eShop for $5.99, but you can also get it on the SEGA 3D Classics Collection, which I've seen as low as $19.99 at retail. So either way, look out for a steal. So do I recommend 3D Galaxy Force 2? Yes, especially if you're into learning about the historical value of games, because this is one that you might not think is very relevant, but is actually very important in terms of arcade history, but also M2 history, because this is really a fantastic port and a statement as to the type of effort that developers need to be putting into their games. Besides, if Michael Jackson owned a cabinet of this game, you know it's got to be worth something. So I'm going to stop there. I do want to give a big thank you and shout out to Bawesomeburf for reviewing this game before I did and calling my attention to it. So feel free to check out his video, as well as this other video that shows a battle between the ports, or at least a demonstration of what some of the home console ports turned out like. Alright, so I'll cut it short there. Thank you for joining with me. I got a course for the Force, and I can't rest until the galaxy is at peace. Woo, that's my furthest yet. Which is not far.